Aware.
Maybe you could start by telling me a little bit about your backstory. I read your bio, but for people who are listening, I think it could be interesting.
Okay. All right. Well, the backstory, I guess how I started in astrology, my interest in astrology, that actually began way, way, way back when I was 27 or 28 years old. I was actually entering my Saturn return, which of course at the time I didn't know at all. I didn't know what Saturn returns were. I didn't know. And I can explain what that is later, but it is a
Mhm.
significant shifting in consciousness. And usually at that period of life, it's from age around 28 to 29 and a half, where we're really facing our karmic past, whether it's in this life or previous life, and kind of being birthed through the birth canal, really intense focus. And oftentimes Saturn return, it's like things that we believed in the past, or were, that were things that was meaningful to us in the past suddenly becomes meaningless. And since I didn't know astrology at the time, but I had a serious, it was like suddenly it was like the literally felt like the earth had been ripped out from underneath my feet around that time. And I was desperate, and I was searching for help. And I have no idea why I went to an astrologer originally. I mean, I don't know where I got the idea from. Um, but at the time, what happened was I'd been studying geology, and I was absolutely passionate about geology. I loved studying the earth, and it was just pure joy. And I'd spent probably about the previous 6 years studying geology. My favorite thing was going out to the field, connecting with the rocks, and just studying them intellectually. But I at the time I didn't realize how heart driven I was. I mean, so much of this at that point was unconscious. It wasn't until after I felt like the earth pulled the umbilical cord away from me. And it happened when I was about 27 years old. It just like suddenly the passion was gone. Suddenly the connection, I'd be out in the field, and I could just I felt absolutely nothing emotionally. I didn't feel the passion. I didn't feel the connection. I didn't feel the desire to understand. It was just like completely disappeared. Um, and at the time, I didn't realize that I had such a deep connection. It wasn't until it was gone that I realized what I had had. So, and I was finishing up my bachelor's degree, Bachelor of Science at the University of California in Santa Cruz at the time. And at the point, too, I was studying, which is definitely not my forte, physics. Well, I'd already gone through the physics and calculus, but now it was at a higher level of geophysics and geochemistry, and it just on and on. And so, without the passion and the heart connection, studying at such an intense mental level, which is difficult for me anyway, made it almost impossible. The only
Mm.
way I could do it previous to that was because I so loved what I was doing. So I was in my last semester of my last year, and I was actually even thinking of just not even finishing my degree.
Mm.
I'm a sun in Aries, and we can be we can make these sort of drastic decisions without thinking, especially when we're younger. That just suddenly cutting things off. It's like, okay, well, what kept going through my mind? What is the use of a bachelor's degree, and when I'm not loving what I'm doing anymore? What am I gonna do? So
Mm.
anyway, so I ended up with an astrologer. I went to see her, and I just remember, I went to the astrologer. It was an hour session. I didn't say one word the whole session. She just talked nonstop from the beginning to the end, and I walked away just completely blown away how much she described of me that just so resonated as true. And it was more on a superficial personality level, which was perfect for me at the time.
Mhm.
Um, I remember kind of like just walking away with my jaw open, going, wow, I can't believe, how someone who has no idea who I am, could describe me so well. And so anyway, so I walked away from that, and so for probably about 15 years after that, I like every year or so I'd go meet with an astrologer for guidance. Um, And then eventually I decided, so I left the field of geology. I worked in the field for a while, but I was always looking to, okay, what's next? What am I going to study next? Eventually, after about 7 or 8 years, I decided that I didn't know anything about relationships after having gone through some real serious, heartbreaking relationships. And I just really got that I wasn't handling it very maturely. So I decided I was going to study psychology. But I also knew that I didn't want to study traditional psychology. Um, and so I found actually, about 10 years later, I found a graduate program, master's in transpersonal psychology, which just completely, as soon as I heard it, I just completely resonated with it. It was just, it felt perfect. So at this point, I was living on the East Coast, which is where my home is. And I'd always felt like I wanted to go back to the West Coast. I always felt such a coherence with California. And so the graduate program was in the East Bay outside of San Francisco.
Mm.
So I went and studied, got my master's in transpersonal psychology. And it was at that time when I studied astrology on the side, like more of a serious study of astrology. I found a teacher, and I would study with her on weekends. But it wasn't really until after I graduated with my master's degree, then I heard a talk. Somebody handed me a tape of a talk by Richard Tarnas, who is a incredible astrologer. The talk was not about astrology. It was actually about the history, the passion of the Western mind, he was talking about the sort of archetypal dynamics of our history going back in time 2,000 years. And I was just completely blown away by it. I just somehow, as I was listening to this, I thought to myself, I just have to go study under this person.
Mm.
And it turns out that Rick Tarnas was teaching at the California Institute of Integral Studies in San Francisco, which I was in the East Bay at this time. So I connected with him. I began the program probably 6 months after I graduated with my master's degree. And lo and behold, I didn't know he was an astrologer. I didn't know astrology was a passion of his. I enter into the program, and all of a sudden I'm, surrounded by people speaking the language of astrology. And here
Mm.
I am in a graduate program, and it was so exciting. And so I just blossomed there. I mean, I really felt for the first time, God knows how many years later, this was probably about 20 years later, that suddenly I felt the passion in my heart again.
Mm.
And, and it was a very exciting time. I was there for about 6, 7 years. And studying astrology, but also, doing graduate work in consciousness was a big part of it. And so astrology was part of the consciousness studies. And then I fell in love, and with Chris Beisch, and who was a adjunct professor at the time. And I decided he actually moved out to he was in Ohio, and got hired to work for the Noetic Sciences to be their educational director for a couple of years. And so we dated at that time, still in the Bay Area. But when he decided to go back to Northeast Ohio to return to his teaching, he was a full-time professor in religious studies. He wanted to go back to his teaching, which was his love. I decided to join him. I was at the dissertation phase of my doctoral studies at the time, and I figured I could just do my dissertation in Northeast Ohio rather than out in the Bay Area. So I came to Northeast Ohio, and it really hit me that I was in such a humongous debt after having gone to graduate school for God knows, probably
Mm.
about 9 years in the Bay Area. I mean, the debt was just enormous. And I thought, I just really need to get a job, kind of live a normal life, if you will. So I decided that's when I started doing astrology professionally, but it was on the side. So this is where I got a job working at Youngstown State University, which is a public university. And I got a job as a career counselor. So it was kind of a takeoff on my master's degree, but working in a very traditional kind of, university setting.
Mm.
But I was able to really sort of develop my passion with astrology by starting to do readings.
Mm.
uh, on the weekends. So for about, I did that for about, what was it? So I was a career counselor for 15 years. I became the director, and got to actually create a whole program working with undecided students at the public university, which was really my passion in that job, helping them to choose a major and a career path based on who they were. Now,
Mm.
I would have loved to have used astrology with the students, but of course, that was I was convinced that I would have gotten, I would have lost my job if anyone found out that I
Yeah.
was looking at the kid, the students' birth times and or birthdays, and I didn't have their birth times, but I could get their birth dates, and it would have been just such a wonderful learning curve through to have, probably thousands of students, their charts and looking at, aligning their careers based on their charts and based on what they tell me and so on. But I couldn't do that. I had the Myers-Briggs type indicator,
Mm.
and something called the Holland theory. So I use psychological sort of tools to help students become self-aware and then help guide them in choosing a career path that aligned with who they were. Um, and I did that for 15 years, but then I got the opportunity to create a whole department where that's all we focused on, and got to hire staff and direct it and so on for a couple of years. And that was wonderful. But once the department sort of got grounded, its feet on the ground, I just knew it was time to leave. And so a year and a half ago, I actually retired early
Mm.
from the university to do astrology full time.
Awesome.
So, and that is, yeah. So, and I just, and so that going, to time, make the full loop, the days when I was doing geology, studying the earth and really studying time by looking at, tens of thousands, if not, millions of years of time, like, studying through the rocks through
Yep.
time. Now it's like I feel like cosmically connected in a way. So it's like bringing the cosmos with the planet Earth and
Mm.
the aliveness of all that. So now I feel really connected both above and below,
That's
and
cool.
I feel really blessed to be able to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting to think about the sort of the correlations between the geology and the astrology. So
Hmm.
I don't want to like spend a ton of time. Well, I shouldn't say that. I doubt that a ton of really skeptical people would probably listen to my podcast
Yeah.
anyways. But I also like, if anyone does, or just
Hmm.
maybe to give people who some tools to talk about astrology to skeptical people, like people who listen to this and it resonates with them, but then they get in a
Hmm.
conversation, which I've been in this position before where I'm trying to explain like how astrology could work or why it's important or just a perspective on it to somebody who's like really grounded in the materialistic scientific view of reality and has a real hard time with thinking it's just a bunch of mumbo jumbo, or that people who are giving readings could just be like
Yeah, making things
looking
up.
at your personality, like looking at your face and your clothes and trying to, some sort of
Yeah.
trick like that, or like, well, these things are kind of some of these things are pretty general and kind of universally
Hmm.
applicable. So I'm just kind of wondering like what you think about some of those things, like how you would explain astrology. Obviously, you're an educated person and you're very articulate and you've spent a ton of time in schooling, so you're not some sort of total just hippie. Um,
Hmm.
so I'm just, yeah, I think you know what I'm trying to say is just how would you explain astrology to some people who are skeptical, I guess?
It's that's a really good question. It's funny because it brings me back to the days when I, had my first astrology reading, and and I was just walked away just absolutely blown away because I didn't say anything. She didn't allow me to say anything, and I kept wanting to say, give her feedback, but I couldn't even get a word out of my mouth. And then I left there and I ended up working at Columbia University. So I was surrounded by scientists. I was in their environmental department outside of New York. Anyway, and I was so just passionate about astrology. I'm the kind of person who can't hold things back. So everybody knew I was studying astrology or that I was interested in it. And so I was surrounded by scientists with just this, like, I could see their eyebrows raised. But there were, it's interesting because there were different levels of scientists. There were some of the scientists were just like, they intuitively just were interested. I could see in their faces that they were open to what I was saying. And the reality is you can't scientifically explain from a mechanistic model how astrology works. You just can't go there because that's not, something else is going on. And the something else, in which I didn't have the language way back then to describe to them, but the something else is what we call archetypal resonance. Okay. So for someone who doesn't know astrology, if anyone's listening who is an astrologer will already know this, but for those who don't, planets are they symbolize, or they're resonant. It's more than symbolizing, they're resonant with archetypal fields. And if anyone who does consciousness expansion, that we recognize that we are governed by our own personal psyche that actually goes way, way, way back in time, way further back in time than our individual life. And we're also governed, or we're influenced by archetypal fields that we're connected to. Okay. And so the truth of the matter is just when you're when you're self-aware of your internal life and correlating it with the external life, you recognize that there's something more going on than just, eating, sleeping, going to work, trying to make money, trying to build, that there's something more driving. And the language I would use is at a deep soul level, is pushing us to evolve and to become more self-aware. In the self-awareness, that includes becoming aware of our connection, not only with one another, that's very important, but also with the larger cosmos and the larger archetypal fields that are influencing us. And so as we're sort of going through our lives, we're being influenced internally and externally. And as an astrologer, going back to the astrology, I'm looking at the planets as they are frozen in time and on a two-dimensional piece of paper. Mm-hmm. And that frozen in timeness is from the moment of that person's first breath as they come out of the birth canal. And that configuration of the planets in the sky in relationship to the Earth tells us, it explains, it doesn't explain, it sort of gives us the blueprint for the psyche, and where our challenges are, and where our gifts are, and where our evolutionary intention is. What are we evolving towards, and what do we need to shed in order to evolve as a human being? And so the correlation between the chart and the person that I'm talking to, or let's say if I'm trying to convince a skeptic, is purely on an individual, deep, sort of soul level sort of experience of the meaningfulness of their own psyche in that moment in time related to their larger life. If that makes sense. I hope I'm not just, I hope this is making sense. So what's important to a skeptic is for them to get it, it's not going to happen through logic. It's not going to happen through mechanical. I can't explain how the planet Mars, kind of prompts a person to respond in certain archetypal ways, with this sort of correspondence to Mars. Now, everybody is going to respond to Mars differently, but it's still within the archetypal field of Mars. And once you study the archetypes, you really get it. You see Mars being operated in a million different ways, but it's still the archetype of Mars. And when I'm speaking to, if I was to do a reading or a skeptic, the only way this person would be convinced is if I give them meaning to their lives. if I touch something in them that helps them to open up their mind that there's something greater going on
Mm,
than what their analytical sort of left, I want to say left brain, but the analytical side of the mind, how it in the sensory, through the five senses of seeing, touching, tasting, smelling, and hearing, how they understand reality, that there is a greater reality there that goes beyond the five senses and goes beyond analysis. And it's much more subtle and yet very profound. And the only way I'm going to convince a skeptic is to give a reading, or not me, but have an astrologer give a reading who doesn't know this person at all, and it somehow deeply resonates with them. Okay.
mm-hmm.
That is the beginning of opening up the mind that this world is much more complex than we recognize, and it's only through time and experimenting that one sort of really starts getting it. And it really is through meaningful coherence, right? Versus sort of the linear, logical, mechanistic, I punch you, you hurt kind of thing, or Mars trips you up and you fall flat on your face. Mars doesn't trip you up. But the archetypal configuration, how it resonates with the individual's chart, could make you, at a certain point in time, feel so intensely angry that you end up just creating, just a crazy reality where you keep tripping up.
Mm. Yeah,
Does that make
so
sense?
I
Okay.
yeah, it does. And I've heard people say things like such and such planet is so far away, there's no way that that
Yeah.
planet would have some gravitational
Yeah.
effect, blah blah blah.
Right.
Would you think of it more less like the physical planets are
Right.
having some effect and more like um I don't know. I mean, I understand the archetypical thing, and I don't know a great way to explain it, but almost like looking at the planets is almost more of like looking at like a guide, like a hands on a watch or something, like representations of a moment in time that can, and then you're looking at these energetic sort of patterns or something like that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's kind of like, trying to, I'm not sure this is going to work, but when you said the hands on the watch, it reminded me of something. It's like the hands on the watch don't cause time,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
So it's
exactly.
the same thing with the planetary archetypes. They don't literally cause you to do things. It's more of a coherence between the individual psyche and how we're kind of wired, or the blueprint of who we are, with that planetary archetype in the sky. And once we kind of come into coherence, or we fight it, whatever we choose to, we have complete and absolute free will on how we want to engage with that archetypal dynamic. So it's
Mm,
almost like, the way I sort of intuitively visualize it, it's almost the way, if the atmosphere that we live in, there are waves surrounding us, and there can be a wave that's coming in, that's kind of nudging us in a certain direction, and if some people will feel it very powerfully, emotionally, that they need to move, in a certain direction. So it's kind of like the archetypal. So they're responding to the archetypal dynamic. But
mm-hmm.
again, it's not literal. It's not based on physical laws through the five senses. It's based on much. I don't even know what to call the laws, but
Yeah. No,
much higher laws,
I
more
know what you're
subtle laws.
saying, and I think we've all grown up in a culture that has really believed that we can measure and explain everything through logic and the rational mind. And
Mm.
um, I mean, if you have any type of transcendent experience or, just kind of awakening, it becomes pretty obvious that this is such a mystery. Everything about life is so mysterious, and there are forces far beyond our logic and our intellect that we have the capacity to sense and feel and intuitively understand that there's no way we could imagine putting words into it. And there are some really articulate, eloquent people that can describe some things very
Hmm.
well, but it still doesn't quite do justice, the
Right.
first hand kind of intuitive sense and knowing of certain types of things. So this kind of transitions into um, another question, which was like, um, so I found some value in certain like daily horoscope type things. I don't know if you agree, but I think they maybe kind of can get a bad rap at times. Like if
Mm-hmm.
somebody is like a good astrologer, I would imagine that they could give some valuable insight into what's the alignments are for the day and what kind of energies those could bring up. But I'd like to know what you think of that. But just overall, I'd like to know, what you think some of the most valuable way to use astrology is. Like what kind of things can it do and what can't it do? I know a lot of people, I think, probably want it to give them specific answers for certain, things that they're struggling with in their life. So yeah, what are the limitations and what are kind of the ways that it's
Mm.
most beneficial to use astrology?
Well, just to start with the daily horoscope, which is based on the sun sign, which is, and some people really resonate with that, which I understand because the sun is at the center of the solar system. It is a powerful force. I mean, the archetypal energy of the sun, the solar um, force, is just. I mean, it's our light. It's our life. It's what Um, is invigorates and inspires us to be in the world. So the sun itself is incredibly powerful out of the 10 planetary archetypal pantheon. So in some ways it makes sense that people resonate with the sun sign astrology because it's,
Yep.
and then as an astrologer, who knows, who's I'm so connected to all the other planets, it's like it just stuns me that you can just look at one planet and even find some kind of correspondence. And then of course, like I said, I've already mentioned, I'm an Aries. Now there are a million other Aries out there, and my relationship to my Aries solar Aries archetype is very different than so many other Aries. Actually, in fact, I have many people say, "Boy, you sure don't seem like an Aries."
Mm.
And as an astrologer, I look at my chart and it totally makes sense because I have all these other like water, which is challenging my fire,
Hmm.
constantly, that I live with every moment of the day. So everybody is such an individual, and so, but that's the beauty of these archetypes. They're, it's still within the archetypal complex, and yet there's a million different ways that that archetypal complex can be recognized, and yet you recognize that as that archetypal construct as the sun is. So that's the one thing. So on one level, but it feels pretty superficial to me. And most people, when they come for an astrology reading, they want certainly something that really resonates with their soul, not just on the level of the personality. And so everything has its place. Now, I'm very clear with potential clients that I don't do predictive astrology. So when you're asking about the play, what is astrology's place? Every astrologer has their own unique bent of astrology, and there are what's called mundane astrologers, and they tend to be more Eastern oriented, which is predictive astrology. Now they will look at the exact same chart and see it totally differently than I
Mm.
do, and vice versa. So I don't do mundane astrology, predictive astrology. And so if someone is looking for something like that, then I will be very honest and say I just can't help you. My type of astrology is what I call soul-centered astrology. I really look at the karmic past and the evolutionary intention of that particular soul, which is very different. And some people don't want that. Some people
Hmm.
maybe just want a personality astrology. And that's like when I was 27 years old, that was perfect for me at that time.
Hmm.
So it has its place, but it's not, one size fits all, that's for sure.
Yeah. So what, so I totally get the sun sign thing, and it's like a very overly simplified way of thinking about astrology to think that your sun sign is like all that you are and that you
Right.
can get all of this information. I'm wondering what you think of something that I've been doing, mostly because I don't understand my chart well enough to look at everything that's going on and think about all the different aspects for myself. And I don't
Mhm.
regularly have astrological readings. So something that I've been doing is taking in some information about my three major, like my sun sign, my moon sign, and my rising, and mostly just like kind of consuming some people's breakdowns, which I'm assuming they're basing it off people's sun signs, these horoscopes. Say
Mhm.
like my moon is a Scorpio. I'm looking at
Right.
somebody's like March 2020 breakdown of astrology for a Scorpio. I'm assuming they're looking at it for somebody who's a Scorpio sun sign,
Mhm.
but I'm looking at it for my moon, and
Mhm.
I'm not taking it super ultra literal. I'm just kind of listening for themes and things
Mhm.
that might resonate with stuff that's going on in my life. Does that seem like it makes sense from your perspective as an astrologer? Like, would that be valuable for somebody to do that?
Absolutely. I've done that myself in the past when, years ago. And I found it, so I'm a Aries sun with Cancer rising. So I would always read Aries and Cancer.
Mm,
Okay.
yep.
So, and then the moon Aquarius. So I think that's actually a very good way to go. It's a very
Okay.
easy way to go, for it to help sort of with guidance.
Yeah,
Yes.
because I've noticed I'll find certain themes in the Leo that which is my sun that I'm resonating with, but then I'll listen to a Scorpio or read a Scorpio thing, and
Mhm.
it's like, oh, there's another little piece to the puzzle that also
That's
is
right.
resonating with where I'm at right now, and
There you
so
go.
it has seemed to kind of round out the picture a little bit.
And that's why I think your point here is important when you said resonate. It's important to listen to what resonates. If it doesn't resonate, I mean, you can intellectualize it up the gazoo, and it's
Right,
meaningless. You're not going to
right.
you're not going to connect. It's not going to powerfully shift anything, but resonance does.
And that's what I've sort of like my argument to skeptics would kind of be as well, is it's like, does it really matter what is going on? It's like if
Yeah.
a piece of information like triggers something in you that you already feel or believe or perceive about what's happening in your life, and it can help you achieve some of your own like internal insight into something that's going on, then why does it matter what the how they arrived at the information they did? You know what I mean? It's similar to like tarot or any type of divination
Right.
method.
Exactly. Precisely. Yes. I think the power is in the transformation. If it brings insights, if it shifts something emotionally and kind of opens up your mind to an awareness of something you weren't aware of previously, that's where the power is. Um,
So
yeah.
something just kind of popped into my mind is, what about people who might get allow, astrological things to start making them like have fear around things, like whether Mercury
Hmm.
retrograde's coming up or
Hmm.
this alignment
Right.
that's scary, or
Oh yeah,
I
I
read
know.
my horoscope and it said I was going to lose some money, or what's a way,
Yeah.
like what do you think about that, and how can people kind of help to not let that happen?
Yeah. So actually, yeah, no, that's a really good point. So, well, both sides, the whole spectrum there, whether it's like, somebody may read, oh, you're going to make money this week, or you're going to have, you're going to win the lottery kind of thing,
Yeah.
or the opposite end of the spectrum, right? So either we expand or we contract, and it's based on information that honestly is on some level is quite superficial, right?
Yeah.
So it goes back to what you were saying, looking for something rather than finding fulfilling wishful thinking. It's like really reading it to look for the patterns of connection. What has a deeper emotional meaning to me? What resonates more deeply? Now, something, let's say, if you're living, this year, let's say if you had a major contraction or even a minor contraction, you kind of always live sort of on the edge of financial, like, oh God, just barely making it from one week to the next. And then you read
Hmm.
in an astrology column that something disastrous is going to happen financially to you. Of course, you're just going to go like, oh my God, because you're already, feeling unstable when it comes to the financial realm. And that is where it's that's where it's not useful at all. I think this is where, because then you're kind of we're falling into that external circumstances control us.
Yeah.
And so an astrology column can say, something terrible is going to happen, and you're already resonating with that, and you're not thinking clearly. So,
Yeah.
I mean, I think life is constantly asking us to shed the external dependency, that things are caused from outside of ourselves. If I'm feeling financially insecure, which, believe me, I know what that feels like. And you kind of worry any moment, something's going to collapse from underneath you. It really is being asked to go deeper, right? Rather than contracting into fear, but like surrendering to the fear and going deeper and just really ask, what is really going on what is my sense of personal value, and why is that being translated externally in my outer world weekly?
Yeah.
So what does that say about my own sense of internal value of who I am? Why am I
Definitely.
creating this, this world that is, financially unstable, because it's, the external mirrors the internal. And so that's where the columns can be very dangerous. And astrologers too, who get caught up in, oh, you've got these terrible transits, boy, watch out, be
Yeah.
very careful. Um,
I think, if somebody has a lot of self-awareness or just can take a more like detached view or an objective view, maybe is a better way to put it. You could look at, okay, I feel a lot of financial insecurity. I read a horoscope that said I might come across a financial hardship. And the fact that that triggers fear in me is an indicator that it shows me my financial insecurity, and it shows me something that I could try to work on, like, or just try to really allow myself to feel and move through. It's not, maybe it doesn't need to mean that, oh, I need to believe that something bad's going to happen and I need to have fear about it. It's more of just it's giving you a signpost, like an internal, indicator of how you actually feel about yourself or your situation, kind of like if a person on the street, you know, makes fun of your shoes or something, if you feel totally good about your shoes, you're not going to care. You're just going
right.
to be like, what was up with
Exactly.
that guy? But if you feel insecure about your shoes, it's going to trigger you. So I feel like if you're going to get into this sort of stuff, you kind of got to try to keep that perspective on it. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So it's really paying attention, the self-awareness part of what is resonating versus what's not. If it ricochets right, you read something and it says, "Whoa, this is a terrible week financially," and you just, and it ricochets right off of you, then you are, strongly grounded in your own sense of personal value and your
Hmm.
relationship to the outer world. Yeah.
Yeah. So, um, in what ways do you use astrology in, like, for yourself in your life? Do you still
Oh,
use it
yes,
for
yes,
yourself?
yes, yes. I do, and I use it for learning. I mean, I think I've always, really used it for learning. It's just like, so I do follow the patterns in the sky, and I follow the news, and I follow, what's happening in my life, and I use it, so I see sort of the effects, and I use it to learn about the archetypes themselves, to get a more nuanced understanding and a deeper relationship with the archetypes. Um, so, and one thing to keep in mind too, the archetypes are not static entities. I mean, they really, it's our relationship to the archetype, and it is constantly evolving. It's a co-dynamic. Um, that's where I feel like the more I can understand it on a subtle level, the archetypes, the better I can help clients for sure, and
Mm.
understand their relationship to the archetypes. And I'm learning from my clients all the time. Before I do a reading, I spend maybe about 3 hours preparing for the reading, and I have no idea most of the time who the person is if it's a natal chart reading. And then when I start hearing when things resonate with them and they'll tell me a story that correlates with what I've said, it's like, whoa, that's, that's how this archetype shows up. And I hopefully hold on to that. So, yeah.
So what are the kind of the, you mentioned earlier, I think, kind of explaining that there are different ways that we can interact with these energies that are coming up. So maybe we could pick a specific, like so let's say Saturn is about to move from Capricorn to Aquarius, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
so what is that? What was the Saturn? Yeah, I don't know. You could kind of pick whether it's you want to address the Capricorn version or the Aquarius version, but I'm
Yeah.
kind of looking for basically some example that we could describe. Like this is kind of what the general theme of the energy is, and ways that you can kind of. You said we have free will to kind of interact with it. So like, what are those ways that we could interact with these energies? Does that make
Great.
sense?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, so it's been what, 2.5 years or so that Saturn has been in Capricorn, but we've gotten a powerful sort of punch, if you will, metaphorically, with not only, Saturn in its own sign of rulership, Capricorn, but then Pluto's in Capricorn, Jupiter's in Capricorn, Mars is in, Sun, especially when the Sun was going through Capricorn. So yeah, Capricorn has been a real archetypal theme, and we observe the world around us. We see how the economic system, actually when Pluto went into Capricorn, it was in 2008, and then that was the economic, sort of financial, that was when the housing bubble burst. And so Capricorn is very much around structures, institutional structures. It rules, Saturn and Capricorn rules society. And so it's like we're seeing it, deconstruction all around us: economic, political, social. People are really attuned to, seeing how so many of our previous assumptions are just dismantling around us. And that's fundamentally Pluto in Capricorn, because Pluto is death. It's for the sake of rebirth. It's the cycles of death and rebirth. So it is dismantling, it is transmuting. But to transmute, to transform, in order for something new to be reborn, things have got to dismantle. So yeah, we've been experiencing that, very focused significantly for the last years. And now, as the energy is shifting, so there are different levels of shift. The first is Saturn going into Aquarius, as you mentioned. It actually goes into Aquarius March 21st. So I've been excited about that.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, those of us who resonate with the Aquarian energy. I've got my moon in Aquarius, but it's just so it is exciting, especially compared to Capricorn, because it's going from, Capricorn is earth, it's physical, it's time, space, it's karma. When you have Pluto and Saturn and Capricorn, it's just like facing our karma big time, both collectively and individually. As we go into if we've done our work, if we've really taken self-responsibility, that's Saturn. Wherever Saturn is, it's asking us to take responsibility. It's asking us to grow up. It's asking us to mature. That's what the Saturn cycles are. And so if we took the responsibility to face our karma and take responsibility for it, rather than projecting it, blaming everybody else around us, as some people we know, it's then if we transmute, if we really kind of move through our karma, then Saturn goes into Aquarius. It's moving into the mental realm. It's going from earth to mental, to the mind, really. And there could be, with Saturn in Aquarius, sort of this an awakening, an awareness. It's like suddenly, the mind that was so depressed and feeling like it was in a tunnel, I like to call it the birth canal and the contraction of the birth canal. It's like suddenly see the light at the end of the tunnel. And it's like, now, keeping in mind, Saturn and Aquarius is going in March 21st, but then it will retrograde, its apparent motion will go back into Capricorn. So it's like we are attuned to the light at the end of the tunnel. Aquarius is the archetype of It's like equality, human equality, and the collective sort of balancing out of so where people are, where there's equal distribution of, let's say, finances, economically, but also socially, where people are really being recognized for their unique individualities and given equal value across the spectrum, rather than the hierarchical, the Capricornian, rising up the ladder, and the higher up the ladder you go, the more value you have. Where Aquarius completely just sort of dismantles that hierarchical thing.
And what's the
So
effect of Saturn on that Aquarian
it's,
energy?
well, see, when it goes into 0 degrees, it's usually we're getting the harsh part of it. So we're probably getting the Saturnian, the contraction of, and the contraction could be, which we're starting to feel now as we're coming into it, is, yeah, we are a global society that, like now with the COVID-19 virus that is just expanding globally, and I've just heard that Trump has shut down the borders. People can't fly in or out of the United States, and so it's like, yeah, the recognition of how interconnected we are globally, that is the Aquarian archetype. Okay, now the higher function, let me say the lower functioning of that is contraction, which may very well happen, and polarization. Okay, because Aquarius, Uranus, and what am I saying? What am I missing? And 11th house, they're all the same archetypal energy. It can contract, it can get it can be extremes, and it can get extremely polarized, the haves versus the have-nots. And then with Saturn, because Saturn rules contraction, collectively we can if we contract into fear, then we become hoarding, like you hear people running to the stores and stocking up on toilet paper of all things,
Right.
it's like, it's like the instinct if we come from a instinctive model of scarcity, which collectively the consensus state tends to, they may end up starting to hoard and isolate, and rather than the opposite, which is share, give, and connect. So now when you have the virus, it does kind of force isolation, right? Which is Saturn. So in some ways, as it's going into 0 degrees Aquarius, there is kind of a forced isolation that's starting to happen, which is scary. It's scary for people, because people who really believe in, helping humanity and sharing and giving and connecting. It's hard to do when you're afraid, somebody might be infected with the virus and you'll instantly get it.
Yeah.
So we're really having to face, where we are along that spectrum of polarization. And then, of course, the polarization, which we've been seeing happening, is conservative versus progressive, extreme conservative versus extreme progressive, where really the Aquarian, so that's the negative aspect of Aquarius. The more positive is where we really recognize every human being as a unique individual, and we need to support one another in that way, and to share, across the spectrum. That is the higher functioning of Aquarius. And one last thing I just want to say too about the higher functioning of Aquarius is also the vision. Aquarius rules vision. That a higher vision, collective universality, where we're really supportive of one another, and kind of. So the question is, what is your goal? Okay, like when I'm working with clients and with Saturn coming into Aquarius, what is your goal? And and staying true to the vision, the higher vision, right? And Saturn is about working, staying focused, being patient, showing commitment, and working slowly towards that goal. Okay. But so it's very important with Saturn Aquarius to not lose sight of the vision, because the vision is the light at the end of the tunnel that will guide us to higher awareness, which is Aquarius.
So it seems like to have the capacity to be able to work with these energies in the most highest form, we really have to be comfortable with our own fear response.
Exactly.
because we can still feel it, but we don't have to act from that place, you know? And I'm not saying there isn't reason to be afraid of things that are going on in the world, but the bottom line is fear doesn't seem to help any type of decision making and, you know, responsible action. And the more it heightens, like there's just seems to be chain reactions, like the people going out and getting toilet paper
Mhm.
or whatever, you know, stocking up on things. Although in I think in small ways, yeah, it's probably good to have a week's worth of food if you're going to be stuck in your house
Mhm.
for a week.
Sure.
But at the
Yeah.
same, but you know, if
But
you
that's
take,
different than hoarding, right?
yeah, and if
Yeah.
I,
Yeah.
I just think that like it's not always easy to see what the chain reactions of doing things out of fear might be, you know. And it just seems like there's territory where we have to be real careful that we're not doing a bunch of, you know, immediate action just based
Hmm.
on some fear response that's going to cause all sorts of other chain reactions and make things
There you
worse
go.
than they were in the first place.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely. And this is the process of self-awareness. I think, humanity as a whole, we're all evolving towards greater self-awareness. We're not given the luxury to live unconsciously like we had in the past. I think that's what, with Pluto and Saturn going through Capricorn, I think that's what that's a significant part of that archetypal combination. It's like, okay, as a collective, grow up.
Mm.
Um, Take self-responsibility for our self-created worlds rather than being reactive to the outer world as if we're
Have no,
completely innocent
yeah,
in the drama,
exactly.
right?
Exactly. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, one thing that I feel like what you described about Saturn and Aquarius, um, I've been getting really interested in like relocalization, like local communities and local food production and stuff like that. And I feel like it sort of could be the start of a pressure to move in that direction. I mean, even being isolated and canceling like you know, distant travel and all of this stuff, and um, it just seems like it kind of wakes up that sense that hey, like a lot of our connection is coming from uh, you know, a lot of our food is coming from other countries. A lot of our economy is coming from other countries. We're connecting with people through flights and long distance travel and via the internet. And it kind of maybe shines a spotlight on the lack of community and the lack of like local
Hmm.
connection and
Yes.
sustainability. And so
Yes.
it's kind of something that probably needs to happen.
Yeah.
Um,
That's very good. I'm glad. Thank you for bringing that up. I think
mhm.
you're right on about that. Is really developing the person to person connection in the local community, and also the relationship to our local, the land that we're living on, and
Mhm.
utilizing, getting in resonance with in coherence with the land and growing our own food and buying from the local farmers and so on. And that in itself, like just going to the farmers markets and connecting with the community, and God, how empowering that is.
Mhm.
And then, shifting politics from the level of the community. And that
Yeah.
oftentimes happens at the farmers market, the kinds of connections you make and
Yeah.
getting to know the people in your environment. Yes.
And I was just listening to some stuff about coronavirus this morning, and people were like, our leadership needs to be doing this, or they need to be telling us this. And well, I understand that, and I don't want to get too far in the political weeds here. It just, the sense I got was like, why are we always looking for some sort of authority to tell us what should
Exactly.
happen? Like, we
Yes.
need more sense of autonomy and like individuation and, you
There
know,
you go.
responsibility for our own communities and our own, you know, I don't know. It just felt like there was a disconnect there. And also, I had recently heard some crazy stuff about food, how so many countries import and export the exact same products. Like, they were talking about, I don't remember what country it was. Maybe it was Australia. Like, they'll export tons of wheat from to another country, and then they'll import a bunch of wheat from a different country. And so it's things like that that I think I'm sure there's so many things like that, whether it's like at local co-ops, they just started here in Minnesota, they started charging, or not just co-ops, everywhere, they started charging for bags. Like if you want to, if you don't bring your own bag, you get charged 5 cents or something. And it just seems like there's so many things like that that we could start doing that are very simple, that
Mhm.
are, we're doing so many things that just don't make sense and waste resources and
Waste, yeah.
sever the connection to the local community and rely on, you know, other countries and all these things, that these types of events are probably going to start waking us up to some of that stuff, hopefully.
There you go. Yes, waking up. That's Aquarius. That's Uranus, which rules Aquarius, is waking up.
Yeah.
Jacob, 1 second. I'm going to have to. My AirPods are about to die,
Okay.
so I'm going to actually disconnect. If we could just take a moment,
Sure.
and I'm just going to go. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
Okay, I can hear you fine too. I'm just not going to use anything here.
Okay.
Okay.
So, that was kind of a tangent there, but
Yeah.
I wanted to ask,
Okay.
so with Saturn retrograding back into Capricorn
Mm-hmm.
and those energies you talked about, I feel are just have been undeniable in my own life. They've just been so strong. And so I'm wondering if you have some insight onto like what, how can we not fight that energy, or what's a way that we can kind of work with that and use it to, I don't know if I want to say our own benefit, but
Mm-hmm.
at least not feel completely
Yeah.
crushed by it, or I don't know.
Yeah, it's tough because Uranus, which rules Aquarius, is in Taurus right now. So Saturn is Earth, Aquarius is the mind, and then Uranus is the mind in an Earth sign. So it's almost like, living in the fear that the earthquake is going to happen any moment. The
Mm,
geologists told us, we're living in an earthquake zone and it's about to break.
mm,
So that is Uranus and Taurus. That is Saturn and Aquarius. So the fear of um, surprise, shock. The Aquarian shocks, which on the one hand can can liberate, and that is the actual spiritual purpose of, or one of the spiritual purposes. I'm sure it's much more complex than this, but the pure purpose of Uranus and Aquarius is liberation. It's also individuation, okay, waking up, coming into our own, coming into recognition. It's suddenly like having the light bulb turn on and we can see the subtle reality. It's almost like, yeah, seeing the archetypal forces around us when before we were completely unconscious of them, or you're just totally oblivious of them.
yep.
It's also Uranus in Aquarius rules our past and it rules our future. Okay, it rules the whole timeline. So it could be waking up to how our karmic past is influencing certainly our present, which I think many of us already know, but collectively, the consensus society, for them to wake up to the recognition that life is so much more than just this individual one life, that we are, bound to, that there's karma that we've self-created, and it's our responsibility as individuals to deal with our own karma, and to create our own future. So the positive Aquarian principle is really sort of is waking up to new ideas, to innovation, to seeing things that we were unable to see before. Um, Maybe, I don't know, just one last thing. I mean, this is like really a stretch and
Uh-huh.
probably won't happen in this particular lifetime, but sort of waking up to like suddenly knowing all our past lives and how that's influencing our present moment, and that we can influence the future, that we
Mm.
and know, and suddenly waking up to what our personal evolutionary intention is. And yeah, that to me is Aquarius, ruled by Uranus. And again, its purpose is to liberate us from our own shackles.
So what about when Saturn retrogrades back? into Capricorn, is there gonna what is the rest of the astrology around it? Is it gonna have a different spin on it, so to speak?
Yeah,
Like,
I think what's intuitively what I'm getting, and this resonates with the archetypes itself, is it's like I'm saying, it's kind of like as when Pluto and Saturn are in Capricorn and have been there, well, Pluto anyway since 2008, and Saturn the last 2.5 years. It's like we've been in the birth canal. It's like
mhm,
this constant, really becoming aware of our fears and our constrictions and constraints and things not being the way we thought it was going to be. And it's like we're coming out of the birth canal. It's so Saturn and Aquarius is like we see. It's like we remember our vision. We kind of remember why we came here in the first place, why we incarnated in the
mhm,
first place. A way that feels incredibly freeing and hopeful and inspirational. So you're seeing it, you're feeling it. We can, emotionally attune to it, and yet we end up kind of sinking back into the birth canal again. There's going to be
yeah,
contractions. There's no question about it. Probably as Pluto continues, I think it's until 2044. I've got my figures here. Make sure, yeah, 2044. Pluto doesn't go into Aquarius until 2044, so another 24 years. But Saturn going into Aquarius gives us the opportunity to work to cut the cords to our own karmic shackles. That's
mhm,
Saturn in
yeah.
Aquarius. So yeah, I do see contraction before we're actually move fully into the Aquarian age.
Yeah, so we kind of get a little taste of it, a little vision of what could be, um, what's on the horizon, and then kind of back into the work for a while.
Back into the womb, yeah, to our work. But
Yeah.
but it's so I think the most useful thing we can do right now at this moment is to attune with our vision in a way that completely, inspires us. What kind of world do we want to create? And what do we want that to look like? And
Mm,
aligning with, and this is also Aquarius, is aligning ourselves with our tribe, with other people who see kind of the same vision as we do.
mm,
So even if let's say if you're an engineer and you really would like to get more involved with creating more sustainable technological things, right? Aligning with other engineers who, see something more, who also want to align with developing something more sustainable.
yeah. Would you say that maybe one overarching view that we could have on all of this stuff, astrology related, is that none of these um, alignments or transits or whatever, none of this stuff is, and maybe just this is a life philosophy in general, but um, because it can feel at times like you're almost being like punished or,
Mm.
like there's something bad happening, but ultimately it's all trying to help us, right? In a way you could say, or it's fuel for evolution.
Absolutely. So that is our history. That's our last 2,000 years in the Roman Catholic, whatever religion we've been, conditioning we've absorbed through lifetimes of the belief that we're born in sin, that there's
Mm,
something wrong with us. There's something wrong with being in our bodies. It's something wrong being female. It's something
yeah.
with being on planet Earth. The vision previous, for the last 2,000 years was the up and out cosmology. It's like work really hard for enlightenment so we never have to come back to planet Earth,
Yeah.
right? And so that is what we all hold. And that is that imprinting that we've absorbed. We're being asked to transmute that. So the only way to do it is through it, right?
Yeah.
We've learned you can't push it into the unconscious. There's no such thing, right? So
Mm,
it really is about moving through these scripts, these beliefs that are so destructive. Guilt and shame, and I don't deserve this, or I'm not good enough for that, or it's just we all have to move through that to transmute it.
yeah, it's interesting that there's just that whole idea because well, I know that I've always felt that too, like my idea of spirituality or somebody who was really had things figured out was about being somehow like disconnected from this life, or they were on like another level or another plane or whatever. And lately, I've been feeling more and more like, it feels like really maybe it's about becoming more human,
Hmm.
and really appreciating that humanity and enjoying the simple connections and the desires and the joys and just about really somehow, being able to work through enough of those deep kind of misunderstandings and shames and guilts and pain to really be able to appreciate being being in a body and enjoying,
Live, yeah.
you know.
Yeah, one of the, it reminded me of another part of the Aquarian principle, or what Uranus rules. And Uranus rules fragmentation, mental fragmentation.
Mm,
And what's happened, with souls who, and we've all experienced trauma, either it's this life, past lives, both, what happens during trauma is we become mentally, we can create a mental fragmentation that allows a safe space for us. Um, and what happens, and for some individuals, they develop that so, you know, perfectly that they've developed a genius like quality, which Uranus rules. So it's like they're stuck, they're chosen to stay there because it's beautiful, it's brilliant, it's gives them a lot of gifts and skills, and they're recognized in society. It allows them to function in society, but it's not integrated into the rest of the whole psyche, into their emotional, physical bodies or and spiritual bodies. So folks who come in with this incredible cosmology, incredibly articulate, just brilliant people, they're being asked to face their unconscious, the trauma that they have so stuffed and not dealt with yet. So, and and sometimes it creates mental, insanity, if they continue to kind of revolve around that fragment. But many very bright people, it's like their lives are completely falling apart around them. And I really trust, and I think this is important for all of us, is to trust whatever reverberations are being created around us. We've got to face that and be, as authentic as we can in the moment of whatever we're dealing with around us. And I think the ultimate purpose is to integrate the mind with the emotions with the body.
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
What did you mean exactly by reverberations in that breakdown you said?
So the reverberations, is I see it as is so whatever's happening in our outer life.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say if our husband suddenly says, I've been on a I've been what do you call it, in another relationship for the last 5 years, and
Yeah.
now I'm being honest with you, and you're like, that's so you're running in the shock of, oh my God, how did I not know this? Anyway, but the reverberations are created from inside, from the center
Mm-hmm.
of the psyche, and we create the outer circumstances
Yeah.
that come to us to wake us up to what we've been unconscious of for so long.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is there's no shame around it. It's like we were just unconscious. We were just doing it for survival. And now where our soul is strong enough to where we're being asked to deal with it and to
Mm-hmm.
fix it and to integrate it and to really look at, well, how did I create this situation that my husband for the last 5 years has, gone towards another, been interested in sexually in another human being, and how did I also create sort of this bubble around me that I was not even aware of it, and he had to,
Mm-hmm.
or that I didn't pick up the clues that there was
Yeah.
something not right with the relationship. So I think we can all sort of relate to something similar to that in our lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it seems like, I mean, for me, those things in my life have seemed um like an ongoing process. Like it's not for me, I have different ways that I'm feel at different times are true of interpreting some of those outside things. Like you have an outside event and it can be easy to feel you know, contradicting ways about it, if
Hmm.
that makes sense.
You mean that
Uh,
it's coming, that, feeling like it was something done to you versus something that you created in order for your own waking up? Is that, like feeling both and?
yeah, sort of. Or maybe another way of putting it is when you're starting to think about those things, like, okay, why did I get myself into this situation? It
Hmm.
can be easy for more like protective parts of your personality to come up with
Hmm.
different theories. Like,
Hmm.
oh, well, maybe I didn't love him in the first place, or, you
Right.
know, uh, maybe I didn't treat him good enough, or, you know what I mean? Like, you can have different ideas where maybe sometimes it's a deeper
Hmm.
thing that's not exactly related to the specifics of the current situation. I know that's very vague, but
No, actually, I really get what you're saying, and that I think is something that's really important to honor. That it could be just karmic cleanup from a previous life, like you just had unfinished business, and this relationship was not meant to be a lifelong relationship, for
hmm
instance,
hmm
right? And the soul knows. I mean, when you're living from the center of the heart and the center of the soul, you just know, you know. Eventually, it's just you just know when it's done. Uh,
mm,
and I think what ends up happening is the mind comes in and justifies why it should keep going. Um, and I think that's one of the things that are shifting in our society, right? Well, has been shifting for a long time, where it is easier now to let go of relationships that no longer serve one another, one's soul's evolution. I mean, it wasn't what in the 50s where divorce was extremely unusual or extremely difficult to do, where now it's much easier. Um, I don't want to get too caught up in that part, but the but when you're living from the place of soul, there is no guilt, there is no shame, there is no,
mm,
well, this bad thing, I was in this terrible accident and I actually had this happen where I had a horrible head injury that completely shifted. I did a 90-degree in my life, but I never took it as, I did something bad, and so the universe or God or whatever stopped my life in its footsteps, and kind of created a hole in my life for a number of years. So um, we can interpret it however we want. And I think in some ways we need, whenever we're shocked and there's trauma, we need to interpret it in a way that gives us a kind of a platform, that gives us safety in the moment.
mm,
But once things have settled down and we've kind of reoriented or restructured our life to take in this new information, to absorb the shock to the system, I think then that allows the space and time to kind of see it from a higher perspective. And I
mm.
that's when the awareness starts coming. Um,
Yeah,
I don't know, you're honest.
I think for me in the shock kind of these shock kind of moments where you're really having to look at what position you've got yourself into in your life in a real sobering way.
Mhm.
Um, and there can be a lot of confusion and your interpretations can feel conflicting, and there, like for me personally, there's been so much confusion around different things in my life, and I feel like one of the things that I've even realized recently is I still haven't really just accepted where I'm at right now, you know?
Mhm.
Like I've been close, but it's always like, well, I can accept it, but something needs to change, and maybe it's this or maybe it's that. And there probably are things that need to change, but it just feels kind of like until you get to that point where you really are like okay with where you are,
Yeah.
even if it's not working, the changes you try to make could just be part of coming from the same energy that got you in the situation that you're in the first place, if that makes
Exactly.
sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's the danger when we try to immediately try to fix things. rather than allowing the soul, sort of the wave of the soul, to move us. And it
Mm,
can take years before it actually starts moving.
mm-hmm.
I know when I had that car accident and I lost cognitive functioning. I was in a doctoral program at CIS, and I lost cognitive functioning for not 100%, but pretty close for a while there. It took 2 years. It took 2 years before I felt 80 to 90% recovered. I don't think I've ever
Wow.
recovered, but it just, there's nothing worse when your reality suddenly changes, and you have a head injury, and suddenly your left brain functioning, your analytical, which was so critical to me at that time, was
Mm-hmm.
just not there.
Mm,
Um, and so there, and now, I mean, and part of a head injury is to go into depression, which I never experienced in my life. But but I think also, if for someone who doesn't have a head injury but who experiences such a shock to their world, suddenly their husband is ripped away from them, or their child, or and it's such a shock. It just takes time to just hold still and allow the energy to shift from within in order to create the new reality, rather than trying to force the change as quickly, and trying to bring everything, quote unquote, back to normal as quickly as possible. That just makes things way worse.
mm.
Um,
Yeah, that makes sense. So maybe we could, if you have a little more time, you could talk a little bit about the type of astrology that you do, the evolutionary astrology, kind of what it is and why it is that that's what you were drawn to.
Thank you. That's, yeah. So evolutionary astrology. So I'm going to start with, why was I drawn to that? Well, oh, I have to go back in time here. Why? Because
Hmm.
I was studying archetypal astrology with Richard Tarnas, and that was phenomenal. And I'm continuing. I mean, that still is part of my astrology. Is like I was talking about, the understanding of the archetypes and the subtleties and of the archetypes themselves, which is so profound. But there, oh yeah. So I mean, yeah, it's so funny how life takes us in directions we definitely don't consciously maneuver. I suddenly became really interested as an astrologer. So I was working full time at the time, but doing astrology on the side. It was like the South Node, North Node. It was just, I was looking at everybody's charts, and the nodal axis in astrology indicates, this is the relationship of the sun with the moon. So these are the moon's nodes, and it indicates the karmic past, as the south is symbolized by the south node, and where its placement is, the sign, the house, and planets related to it. And the north node indicates the evolutionary future. Where is the soul desiring to go? Well, I got tired. There was some point where I just got tired of reading, okay, this is what South Node in such and such sign means, and this is what the North Node in such and such sign means. And suddenly I thought, I bet there are astrologers there who have actually done past life therapy, that have actually who've done the correlation between the nodal axis and people's actual past life experiences. Take
Mm,
people into their past life and then looking at the chart and seeing if there's any correlation. Suddenly it was just one of those things that I just dawned on me. And I thought, I woke up in the morning, I said, I'm going to do some research and just see if anybody has done this, right? So immediately a book came up, by Patricia Walsh, and I can't remember the name of the book right now, but Patricia Walsh has been doing thousands of past life sessions, and it happens to be a evolutionary astrologer.
mm,
So, and she wrote a book, and it had recently come out at that time, about the correlations between the past life work she'd done with, got probably tens of thousands of people, and their charts. And so I read the book. I called her up, had an astrology reading by her. And at the time, it said that she was an evolutionary astrologer. That didn't even connect with me at all. It was just, I didn't, it meant absolutely nothing to me. But then I had the desire. I had already been trained in past life hypnotherapy, but it was something much more mentally oriented. And so she was doing, she was a teacher doing workshops and taking people through certification programs to become what is called deep memory process type of past life therapy. And it's
Mm.
working and it's accessing the past life memories through the emotional and physical bodies. Very different than doing it through the intellect or the mind. I mean, I really, because I've been trained with the mind approach. Now this was, and I going into the certification program. And again, this was just following my desire, just the impulse that just kind of overcame me and followed it. I had no idea where it was going to take me. I just wanted to answer the question, what is the correlation in the chart with people's actual past life experiences? I wanted to have an internal, experience of that. And so I started the certification program. And over the next 3 years, which is what it took me to do to become certified in the deep memory process, it turned out there were a number of evolutionary astrologers who were a part of the group that were all being certified together. This was done out in Portland, Oregon. And that's when, and still, it took me probably about 2 years before it started dawning on me that there was something called evolutionary astrology that, and that's when it was towards the end of the certification, when I was going to have more time freed up, that I suddenly thought, I wonder what evolutionary astrology actually is, right? And that's when as soon as I got certified, I decided to go through the training program to become an evolutionary astrologer. That was a long breath to come to the point to explain what evolutionary astrology is. So evolutionary astrology is developed by Jeffrey Green, and it was something, he had been an astrologer, had done tens of thousands, about 15,000 charts one day. And he was also a spiritual practitioner. And I can't remember the name of his spiritual teacher, but his spiritual teacher, whom I don't think was alive anymore, but he was an astrologer. And suddenly one day, Jeff Green it was like he had a dream, and he got this download of evolutionary astrology in Sanskrit in his dream.
Mm.
And so he decided after a while, I think it took him like 7 years to translate, to download it into, to write it out. And so that is the whole evolution, the concept of evolutionary astrology, or the source of it, let me put it that way, is Jeffrey Green and his book, Pluto One, and where he lays out everything there, the whole philosophy of evolutionary astrology. Now, the practice of evolutionary astrology it looks at Pluto in everyone's natal charts as symbolic or giving us the signature of the soul, and those specific soul dynamics from the past that soul brought into this present life in order to evolve. Okay, so Pluto shows, usually we interpret Pluto in the initial part as the emotional vulnerability or the emotional insecurity that we brought in as memory into this lifetime in order to, I want to say shed, but that's too superficial. It's basically to transform in order to evolve to become more of a whole, ensouled human being. So it's like we bring our fears, we bring those contractions in our psyche that prevent us from being empowered individuals. And so the Pluto and all the planets that it's connected to, its sign, and the house that it's in, will tell us kind of the signature of the karmic past. Now, Pluto polarity point, which is the opposite point in the chart, as well as the North Node, will tell us what is the evolutionary trajectory of this soul when this person incarnated. What is the new territory that they're desiring to evolve into in order to be more whole? So it's a combination of the South Node, which is the ego identity of the past, and the memory of that ego identity that we bring into the present. So the South Node in combination with Pluto is our karmic past. Pluto polarity point and the North Node is our evolutionary future, our evolutionary intention. It's not necessarily a future, because we can always choose not to go in that direction, but it is the evolutionary intention.
Mm.
And the north node shows the ego identity that we desire to adopt or we desire to evolve into in order to, again, to become more whole as a soul in the world.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting stuff. And I did a reading with you, and
Mm.
it very much resonated with me. Would it make sense to, um, if you remember, if you have my chart on you or remember, would it make sense to give a little example? Just it could be real brief or not. It does. If not, if that doesn't make sense, I'm just wondering if people would, if it would make more sense to people.
It
But
would be
if
more
not,
practical, right? Well, what I remember, I don't have it in front of me, but I remember, so certain things remember. So I remember you have a Moon Pluto conjunction.
mm,
So moon, so you're bringing in, so the moon is the emotional. Well, let me back up. Pluto, it speaks to us, or it prompts us. It pushes us through the emotional body. How the way to access the soul is through the emotional body, and that's where the power really is. And for you to have the moon, which also symbolizes the emotional body, connected to Pluto, which is our emotional vulnerability, is really, and I remember it being new phase. So it's like you're launching a new identity in this lifetime, a new emotional identity that's very much empowered with your soul. It's like you're desiring as a soul to be what do you call it, transparent to your own soul on the emotional level. And so the moon in the chart is our everyday, is our moment by moment ego identity, or how we kind of maneuver through the day emotionally, and
mm,
how we emotionally respond from moment to our reality. And for you to have that, so that's kind of like our groundedness in this reality on an emotional level. And if for to be conjuncture Pluto tells me that there's Pluto really intensifies everything it touches, so it brings a real intensity to life. Just from the conjunction there, new phase conjunction. So it's like your new phase is like you're here to explore, you're here to learn, and but as an ensouled human being, rather than someone who is constantly being scripted from their past, or constantly the moon can be controlled by one's family's dynamics or family scripts, but it can also be controlled by kind of the neighborhood, if you will, by the people in your environment, right?
mm-hmm.
Being very, oh geez, I'm starting to lose words here. Not being kind of being porous to people's opinions and so on in your environment, especially people that you emotionally care for.
Mm,
Pluto is asking, so it's like a constant reminder or asking you to realign with your soul, and for you to maneuver through your reality and to create your reality. That's the moon, from moment to moment, from a soul-centered place. And I think if I remember right, so yeah, so it also can bring, because Pluto can also symbolize the trauma. So it can bring, this heightened sense of fear and potential anxiety of trauma potentially happening any moment, right?
mm,
And sort of Pluto and Moon could be like, oh, what if I step right when I should step left? Like it comes in with all these shoulds. And so it's like, no, 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 shed those shoulds, and
mm,
the soul and find your power and find the center of your life force itself, so that no matter what's happening outside of you, as long as you're in alignment with your heart and your emotional body, and learning to trust that it will guide you through whatever the circumstances are at that moment.
mm. Yeah, and for people listening, I mean, it's just so spot on for me. There's no way you could know that about me, or you know what I mean? It's like, again, not that I need to make this about convincing skeptics, but it's just really interesting to hear that type of information. I mean, about yourself, and have it resonate like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so you offer these types of readings for the general public, correct?
Sure. Yeah, I do natal chart readings, and so if I've never worked with the client before, that's always the important is the importance is the natal chart reading, because that gives me the platform, if you will, the karmic platform, as well as the evolutionary intention of the soul, and then all the dynamics. It's, I look at all the archetypal dynamics in the chart. But once we've had the natal chart reading, and that's a 2-hour reading. Once that's in place, then I do like solar returns and transit readings and progressed readings for in the future, which is not quite as intensive, or not quite as long. It could be very intense,
Hmm.
depending on what's happening in their lives. But I always have the soul's blueprint, you know, at after the first reading, after that first point, that I can work with when and how to maneuver with the transits that are happening in the sky in the future.
Nice.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I mean, I don't really have any other super pressing questions on my list here. Was there anything that came up for you that you wanted to add or that you feel like is important or?
The only thing I'm going to add is that if anyone is inclined, if they're seeing, because you can only do if there's an issue and you're seeing patterns, repeated patterns over and over and over again, and you've worked, with a therapist, and you've worked even with the doctor, like if it's a physical problem, you've been working it, and it doesn't seem to actually get to the core of the resolve. It could be some deep anxiety that keeps coming up over and over again. I highly recommend doing a past life, a deep memory process session, as a way to kind of get to the source of the trauma that the psyche is holding, because the past can so influence the present. And sometimes we have to go to the past emotionally and physically in order to unravel the past, so it no longer has its hold on us in the present.
Mm.
So that's the only other thing I want to add.
What does that process look like?
It's pretty intense. So I'm very clear with any client who's interested in this that we don't stay at the mental level. We don't. It's not safe. I ask the client to bring any emotional, pain or physical pain into the session. I have them lie down on the floor. They'll be on a mattress or some kind of, cushioning. And then I'll be sitting to the side of them on the floor. And then wherever the emotional or physical pain is, I will take them right into it. And usually, I mean, it does mean touching the body. If, for example, somebody feels a lot of constriction around their throat and they have a fear of speaking, for instance, I will actually, lay something along their throat, because the intent is to trigger the physical imprinting that's holding the emotional fear. There's some
Mm.
contraction there. And usually when somebody, but I will take them into sort of what is it? And there's the beta, alpha, if I'm remembering this, theta, and then to the theta state of consciousness. So a slower state of consciousness, and into a state of hypnosis. But I always allow their left brain, analytical mind, to kind of stay and observe, but not to get involved, because we're moving into, I want the analytical mind to be present and to observe and record, but not to get involved or
Mm.
to analyze or try to figure things out, because a point can really get in the way. But we go into the emotional pain or the physical pain, and that's where the unraveling needs to happen. And then all my job is to ask the right questions. I'm speaking to the body now. I let the body speak, and the body speaks through the person, and it will guide us into where the source of the pain is. And I just let it take the lead, and I'll ask the questions when we get stuck, but it will start unraveling the story. And then in order to unravel the imprinting, I've got to take them through the story. Usually it means taking them through their death in that life, in that previous life. And sometimes it's taking them through the death so that they can see from a higher perspective why that happened or what really happened. You would be amazed how many people think that they caused harm when the reality was, and so they're living with this unconscious guilt in this lifetime, when the reality is, when they see it from a higher perspective, that it had nothing to do with them at all. Or they'll see from the higher perspective that the universe initiated the shifts in order to move consciousness along, and that they were part of that particular wave, and they see the higher reasoning behind it. So it's a combination of, going through the pain and allowing the client to kind of undo whatever was done in the past. It all depends what the situation was. And I'm just going to give you an example. So if someone was, if somebody was hung, something, a lot of times let's talk about the throat, they were hung. I will take them through the hanging, I'll lay a piece of rope around their neck, and just when they're in that state, the pressing on the throat will actually make them feel like they're actually in that past life scenario. And I will have them pull the rope away from their throat. So it helps to empower them while they're in that space time of the past. And it gives them the opportunity to actually do what they could not do back then. Okay, to re-empower the physical, emotional body. And then we go into the bardo, we go through the death of that past life for them to get the awareness of what was really happening. And then we go through, in the bardo, we have the client bring in the people, whether they're going to be, helpers, or they're going to be people from that past life that they need to speak with so that communication can occur. And then so they can communicate whatever was not communicated in that past life. And then they can also listen to what those people have to say to them. And I'll just give you a concrete example from my own. I've gone through like 26 of my own past lives. Wow. And I will continue going. I mean, it's so phenomenal, the awareness. But just one simple past life that's just coming to mind now, where, well, God, there's so many. You could tell so many. One could tell so many stories. But what came to mind was, I was a young mother, had fallen in love. I was up in the northern part of Scotland, up by the ocean, and I'd fallen in love with a young man. God, we could have probably been like 16, 17 years old. We completely fell in love with each other, but it was totally against, I don't know what the situation was, but the whole community was against us coming together. But we were just head over heels in love with one another. And so we had to, because our community did not support it, the minister of the community, it was blasphemy, whatever it was. We built our home way outside in the outskirts of the community. And we had 2 sons together. But because we were not part of the community, my husband had to leave. It probably went to London or some city in order to develop a skill, because we were so young, to develop a skill. And the plan was he was going to develop the skill and make money and then come back and be able to support us. Well, what we didn't realize was it left me with the 2 young boys alone, which made me vulnerable to members in the community. They came and they basically killed me, and they took the 2 boys away. Okay. Now, they ripped the boys away. I fought. They killed me, threw me into a stone pit, covered stones over me. But it wasn't until I got into the bardo and I called the boys to me to connect with the boys that I lost, and I felt incredibly guilty for not being able to protect them against being abducted. Well, when they came to me, to my complete surprise, they were so grateful that they had been abducted, because they had been brought into a rich family somewhere, and they were given an education, and they were given a real life that there is no way that I or my husband could have given them. And so they really, they could, it was like they couldn't wait to tell me what what their life had been like.
Mm.
And, you know, how bad they felt that I was lost, you know, that I had been killed. And yet at the same time, they knew that I would be overjoyed to find out that they had a very good life. Um, so you just, you know, we hold these guilt patterns that usually is based on totally incorrect information, that we don't recognize the higher wisdom in whatever the trauma was.
So do you just sort of not even worry about trying to think about it too much as far as like just kind of like I mean it
Yeah.
to me a lot of the themes in that I see in all sorts of different trauma healing modalities um as far as like re-experiencing sort of the most intense version of the emotion in like a safe environment
Mm-hmm.
and kind of recontextualizing it in a positive light, you know, or just seeing it from a different perspective. And also even the creating a new action within the thing that happened, you know, like kind of going
Oh yeah.
in internal family systems therapy. There's like, you know, you go to your past inner, you know, to your childhood self in a situation,
Yeah.
go as an adult and prevent a situation from happening or pick yourself up and hug yourself and things like that. So it seems like these methods are just sort of some sort of methodology that is just helpful for healing these stuck patterns. And does it really matter if you are trying to figure out like did I actually live this past life or what does this mean? You know, I'm sure there are people who would want to try to think about it scientifically and maybe we know we obviously pass down genes and we carry things in our DNA and all this stuff. So, yeah, I mean, do you have any type of interpretation on it, or do you just kind of go with it?
Well, with what the past life through the emotional physical bodies has taught me is that you can never logically try to figure out the logic of a story. It's
Mm.
always, it's almost even shocking the outcomes. You know what actually ends up happening. You know, clients usually come in with some kind of logical, rational sort of explanation for why they're so stuck in this particular pattern. But when you actually go into the story, it's just astounding how it's something different than you could have ever, you
Hmm.
know, logically have constructed. Uh,
Yeah.
and usually it's so profound. Just, you know, the realization of what the real story was.
And it seems to be pretty powerful at clearing out these
Yeah.
blockages and stuff.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
And what is it called again? I mean, past life hypnotherapy, is it? I thought you said deep.
Yes. So what it's actually called is deep memory process. And so rather than calling it past life hypnotherapy, it's really you're going into the deep, you're processing the deep memory.
Mm,
So it doesn't necessarily have to be a previous life. It can be the present life, you know, going back to childhood and processing using the same
hmm.
techniques. Roger Woolger, sorry, I didn't say that right. Roger Woolger is the one who has designed this. He's a psychologist who no longer is alive, but he's worked with thousands upon thousands upon thousands of clients, and yeah, and developed this particular methodology. But the most important part is taking the pain in the emotional or the physical body, and allowing the pain to guide us through to its own story.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
Um, and that sounds like it's something that you it needs to be done in person.
Listen,
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah.
Is it a, are there quite a few people out there doing this kind of stuff or?
Yeah, Patricia Walsh. It's actually international, and there. I don't know how many trainers out there that there are, but she's the trainer for the United States. So
Mm,
probably every country has, you know, their own trainer. So you can go through the whole program and not get certified. I mean, even that is incredibly valuable, because as you're going through the program, you go through so many your own past life sessions, and then you get training working on other people. But it's so many people go through the program, don't even get certified. They're just there to work their own stuff, and it is really profound when you're working together in a group, and then you have a facilitator who's done probably tens of thousands of these sessions to guide you. It really and then she has her own facilitators that helps work the room with individual couples that are working together. So I don't know if I answered your question on that.
Yeah, it sounds like there's some people out there doing this work. Yeah.
So to find out, yeah, it has to be done in person, and there is, so you just go to a website called oh geez, well, I Google deep memory process.
Yeah.
And oh, there it is. Deep memory process practitioners.
Okay.
And there's a website that will tell you who the practitioners are, what kind of certification they have by state, if you're looking at the United States, by country and then by state. So you can find someone who is local. And I will just add that I am moving from Northeast Ohio to the Asheville area, North Carolina, in next week. My husband are up and moving to a home that we bought down there. And there I will have my own space to do, past life therapy sessions in person.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I'll have all your information, your links, and all of that in the show notes for the episode. So anybody who's interested in checking out your services can do that.
I'll also give you the link to the practitioner website, because I think that's very helpful.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yep. Great. Well, it's been a deep one.
Okay.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It was a great conversation.
Great. Thank you, Jacob.
Yeah.
Thank you.